So today I am so excited to share with you some of my favorite Indigenous fiction books. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today we are talking about Indigenous fiction books because November is Indigenous / Native American Heritage Month, and yeah, I have to do a post about some of my favorite Indigenous books. Before we get started, make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and all I do on this channel is talk about books. If you like listening to people talk about books and book reviews and book recommendations and things like that, that's what I do. Secondly, I need to apologize. The sound from the highway, I don't know if it's loud to y'all, but it is loud to me today. It's like all I can hear. Since we're getting into that time of year where like the trees and stuff are dying, the trees help block a lot of that noise, and now that they're, you know, losing all their leaves and stuff, a lot of that noise just full force. Also, I just think the highway is busy in general today. It's funny because we actually had someone out here like last week to talk about making our windows a little bit more like sound resistant, like to help cut the noise inside the house. And yeah, apparently I'm not in the right tax bracket to get windows like that. Having a quiet home comes at a high cost. But yeah, maybe one day I can have a quiet filming room, but not this day. November is Indigenous Heritage Month in the United States, and I absolutely love reading Indigenous books. Unfortunately, I didn't really get into Indigenous reading until I think it was last year when I read, when I intentionally made room in my lineups for more Indigenous books. And I do feel a little disappointed in myself that it's taken me this long, but the important thing is that now I'm doing it, and I'm making a lot more of an effort to diversify my bookshelf and my reading lists all throughout the year. Even though it's Indigenous Heritage Month this month, you can read Indigenous books any month of the year, as many as you want. So don't think that you have to limit yourself. Diversify your bookshelf all year. And trust me, you guys don't know what you're missing. If you're not diversifying, you're missing a lot, okay? There's a lot of really great books out there. It's so exciting to me to be able to lift up other voices and to be able to read about other people's experiences. It's such a great thing. Reading is such a great thing. Okay, so let's get into it. The first book I'm going to talk to you about today is The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. I think I said that right. She's really well known Indigenous writer, okay? I feel like if you pick up any of her books, you're gonna get some really good representation and a really good story. Let me preface by saying a lot of Indigenous books, in my opinion, that I have read are very emotional for me. For me, it's very emotional to read a lot of these stories because honestly, they're usually very traumatizing, very sad, and difficult. This one falls into all of those categories. So we're following a young Indigenous boy through the summer. His mother has suffered an attack, and he is trying to deal with the aftermath of that happening to him, to her, to his family, what it means for them. Because this is not just any normal attack, it was a targeted attack, and it was very violent. It's about him putting their lives back together. He's about 14, 15, I think, and he feels like he has a sense of duty to rectify this wrong that has been caused to his mother. The whole story is just extremely emotional, extremely sad, and it does get a very good look at what I would call reservation versus state politics. The political lines that are drawn between the rights that Indigenous peoples have on their reservation lands versus what the government will step in and do for them, which by the way is very little. It really does get into that dynamic of dealing with crimes that happen on reservation land versus on basically anywhere else. If you've seen that movie, Wind River, it has a lot of like governmental overlay like that. We really get into like how difficult it is to get crimes solved on reservation land because of the way that our government has cut it up. They basically don't care what happens, and it's almost impossible to get crimes solved. So they do get into that quite a bit here, and you have to imagine all of this happening to a young kid who doesn't really completely understand the system, but understands the system enough to know that it's not going to help. This was a very heavy book, and it was so well done. It was so well done. Like, I felt everything for this book. It was just, she did such a good job. The main character and his family are Ojibwe, and they live on a reservation in North Dakota. So this is a U.S. territory fictional novel. So yeah, that's this one. Heartbreaking, beautiful, just a wealth of knowledge in this book too that was very easy to digest. Yeah. The next book I'm going to talk about is Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. This book, okay, I will tell you, I would only recommend this book for mature audiences only. Let's talk a little bit about Joshua Whitehead before we get into the book. Joshua Whitehead is a two-spirit Ojibwe Cree, and they mainly write poems and do like collaborative pieces and things like that. And so when I saw this book and saw that it was a standalone book, I was super excited to read it. It's very short, so it's very easy to get through very quickly, and it just flies. Like, Joshua Whitehead put something so good together here. We cover so many different types of topics in such a short amount of time. It was just a whirlwind. So basically this story follows Jonny. We get quite a bit of his childhood, which is difficult. He has a strained relationship with his family because he is two-spirit, and basically as soon as possible he moves off res and moves into the big city, where he struggles to find himself and his self-worth, and ends up doing a lot of sex work type of things to kind of get by, but also to feel something. Jonny's a very complex character with a lot of issues, and I think that Joshua just did an amazing job. It was just so heartbreakingly beautiful, this book. And I felt for Jonny the whole time. Like, this book really put me in my emotions, listening to Jonny's story and his struggles of just finding himself. I would say the ending to this book was very open to interpretation. We get dropped into the story when Jonny is faced with his stepfather's dead, and then Jonny's been asked to come back to the reservation for his stepfather's funeral, and this is a little snippet in time of Jonny trying to get together the funds to go home, but also we're getting all of this trauma from his childhood, and basically the reason why he doesn't really feel like he wants to go home in the first place. I think the takeaways from this book are that if you follow a lot of Indigenous creators on social media and things like that, they talk a lot about how culture and their belief system is very open to people being two-spirit or double-gendered or things like that, and how it's just a very beautiful, accepting community. But we have to also realize that a lot of Indigenous peoples went through a massive amount of colonization, and it basically has taken them a really long time to come full circle with their culture and how people treat each other. So this is something that Jonny talks about a lot in his book, and I thought it was like a really realistic glimpse of how some people struggled on their self-discovery journeys. I think Joshua Whitehead put something really great together here. It's really quick. It is quite graphic though, sexually graphic, so like I said, I would only recommend this for more mature audiences, but it really blew me away. The next book I'm going to talk about is 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. If y'all have been here a minute, you've heard me talk about this book because I absolutely love this book, even though Michelle Good broke my heart so many times reading this book. Oh my, I've never cried so much. She really did a number on me with this book, but it's so wonderful what she's put together. This book follows 5 Indigenous children after they're released from residential schools in Canada. This book is set in the 60s, and we get a little bit of background story about each of the kids being in residential school, but their stories really take off as they're released from the school. So I think when they turn 17 or 18 is when they would kick them out, and they literally kicked them out. Each of these stories though, they all went to the same residential school together, but they didn't all get released at the same time. So a lot of the story is them reconnecting after being apart, reading about the trauma that these children incurred while being at the residential schools, and then being released from the residential school and trying to land on their feet and make their way through their lives afterwards. Stunning. Each of these 5 stories were so unique in the issues that they had after they were released, and how some of them were able to kind of move on and have semi-normal lives and really just make the best of things, and how some of them just could not move past what had happened to them. And you have to remember, like, in the 60s, there was no help. There was no nothing. Like, they got released from their residential schools and, like, they could go home, maybe. A lot of them had been away from home for, like, their entire lives, basically. It really gets into the generational trauma that incurs from things like this happening, from colonization, and from the damage that these residential schools did to these young children, and how they carried that trauma with them for so long. It was heartbreaking. Michelle Good did an amazing job with this book. At the end of the book, they start talking about the schools closing for good and things like that, and getting reparations and pursuing legal action against the residential schools and the countries and things like that. It was so much. It was so much. I loved this book. And I know I'm saying that about like every book that I'm talking about, but I mean, these are my favorites for a reason. Obviously, I'm gonna tell you I love them. This book in particular, this one really stuck out to me. I'll have to read more of her stuff because this book was exceptional. The next book on my list is The Marrow Thieves by Cherie, Dimaline. Y'all have heard me talk about this book excessively. I talk about this book a lot. This is a series, and I've been wanting to pick up like the next book in the series, but she's thick. I really wanted to read it this month, but I'm glad I didn't commit to it because this month is already kind of out of control for me. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about this one. This is a dystopian future book, and basically people have lost the ability to dream, and they've figured out that the cure for this is in the bone marrow of Indigenous peoples. So just like let that soak in a minute and just imagine what that could mean. So we don't start the book off at the beginning. It's almost like we're thrown in the middle of all of this happening. So like all of the discoveries and everything have already been made, and basically everyone's just kind of made their decisions about what's going to happen next. Basically, Indigenous people are on the run, and everyone else is trying to gather them up. We have a main character, Frenchie, who at the time that all of this started was probably like 14, and we get to see Frenchie kind of grow up in this post-apocalyptic dystopian future of running from people and meeting up with other Indigenous people as they try to make it to a classified safe zone in Canada. It has a lot of like found family vibes and just this post-apocalyptic edge to it that's just brilliant. It's terrifying but sad, and there's also these just really amazing connections that Cherie Dimaline is able to make throughout the book. You just feel for all of these people. They're just kind of thrown together and they've made their own kind of group as they move forward, and they've all lost people, and they've all it's great what she's done. There's a lot of discussion here about like mixed cultures and things like that, and mixed languages between the Indigenous tribes and things like that. We also get a little bit into the written Indigenous language, which was super interesting. I really got into that. It's such a great book, and the ending left you on enough of a cliffhanger for you to want to read the second one, but not enough to destroy your world. Why I've been able to put off reading the second one for so long is because the end of the book didn't completely kill me, though it definitely could have. This book is definitely, if you want something that's a little bit more fast-paced and just kind of a new and fresh and interesting idea, this book has it. Like, Cherie Dimaline just did something really cool here with this story, but it's also got a lot of like historical aspects to it, like history repeats itself type vibes, but it was really well done. This one, read it. Last book I'm going to talk to you about today is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. If y'all been here for any kind of time, this is another book that I've talked about extensively. I literally just talked about it last month because it really just blew me away. Like, I didn't know what I was expecting when I picked up this book, and it just exceeded everything that I thought I knew. I will start you off by saying this is categorized as a horror book, and it is very graphic and very gory. There's some really good gore writing in this book. It follows 5 Indigenous boys as they go on an elk hunt in their teens, and then something happens on this elk hunt, something bad, and we flash forward to 20 years later. I think it's 20 years, and something has come looking for retribution for what was done that day. And at this point in time, all 5 of these friends have kind of like grown up and lost touch. They've moved around. They don't even really understand that anything's happening that's whatever's happening to them is correlating with what's happening to these friends, because they're not even really in touch anymore. And so all these things just start happening, and then they slowly end up dead. And at some point, the survivors kind of get together and try to right the wrong. I definitely would categorize this as Indigenous folklore, which folklore in lots of cultures is horrifying. And this is definitely one of those stories where it's like horrifying. Writing style does take a little bit of time to get used to, and the pace at the beginning of the book was not the best. I can honestly say the first half of the book was not my favorite, but the last half of the book really made up for the fact that the first half was a little slow. All the good stuff is in the second half of the book. It just really blew me away. Like, how scary it was freaked me out. It really did. And I don't really know that much about Stephen Graham Jones. Like, I wasn't really able to find out very much about him online. But I do know that I'm going to be looking into more of his books in the future. So if you want to hear me talk more about this book, I've done it on previous videos. This book just really delivered for me. There was a lot of really great gore moments. And yeah, the fact that it was an Indigenous book was just like the icing on the top, because the folklore just, it freaked me out. The thing is, like, I've heard this folklore story before. Like, I've heard this specific Indigenous folklore story before, and it didn't freak me out. Because it was just kind of like a glazed over version, obviously, like a very short story. And this really, like, gets into it, and it really scared me. I told my dad and my stepmom, who's Kiowa, to read it, and she said, well, I'm not letting your dad go elk hunting anymore. Not that I've ever elk hunted, but I never will now. Even Graham Jones has made sure that I will never hunt elk, ever. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I know this list is like really short, but these are like my favorite of my favorites of Indigenous fictional books. All 5 of these books are some of the best books I read, like, in general. These are some of the best books I've read. It tops it off even more that they're Indigenous stories, and you get a little glimpse into what other cultures experience, what other people experience, and dealing with very specific generational trauma and things like that. I love reading Indigenous stories, I honestly do, and I love being able to access them. Just remember to diversify your bookshelf all year. Like, you don't just have to read Indigenous books this month or in October for Indigenous Peoples Day. Like, read them all year. They're always there for you to enjoy. And yeah, just diversify as often as you can. These books are some of my favorite books I've ever read. If you don't diversify your bookshelf that often, you're really missing out, honestly. You're really missing out on some really great books, some really great stories, and some really talented writers. Before you go, make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and I don't know what the rest of the month's gonna look like for us. Like, I don't know what the lineup's gonna be, but it'll be a surprise for everybody, I guess. Well, I will see you guys next time. Bye!